I think it's pretty common knowledge by now that study drugs like Adderall and Ritalin are frequently taken unprescribed by college students around the world for those late night study sessions or writing papers, that sort of thing. And I feel like the point of most of these news stories is to communicate the extent of the problem or to discuss the side effects that people don't know about, spread awareness. Then I saw this study on CNN, thanks for the thumbnail by the way, where up to half of upperclassmen and 80% of fraternity people are doing stimulants. I knew this was a problem, but to see the numbers like that, I mean, half of all upperclassmen have tried it, just really made me step back and go, wow. What the hell was this when I was in college? I mean, I only graduated university a few years ago and in engineering no less, but I didn't see any of this. I mean, I guess I am assuming that there'd be more abuse in more difficult degrees like engineering, but I mean, maybe we're all just such squares that, we would never do drugs. I mean, look at this guy. Look at this face. You think he's doing drugs? So I knew this was a problem, but now you're telling me that half of upperclassmen have done this? I mean, what does that say about me? Was I just not cool enough to get offered any drugs? Where was my peer pressure? Where were my bad influence friends? I would have loved to try this in college. But don't get me wrong, I didn't want to take it just because I wanted to abuse more drugs in college. Or, any drugs. It just would have saved me so much time getting my diagnosis. Because I remember the first time I took Adderall, after my diagnosis a few years later, I just felt relief. For the first time ever, it felt like. I remember sitting down and just feeling pure astonishment at the sudden unburdening of all the mental chaos I had been used to my whole life. And this isn't unique to me. I mean, look at this. I just took the first dose of ADHD meds in my whole life this morning. I'm at a loss for words at the amount of clarity I have for the first time in my life. I'm able to think about doing something and then I can just do it. Have y'all just been living like this? So when I was reading that article that up to half of upperclassmen have tried it, it just made me think again about the differences in how these study drugs or the ADHD drugs affect people with ADHD and how that differs and how neurotypical people take it and how it affects them. Which, by the way, just as an aside, does anyone else not really like the term neurotypical? I mean, I don't know what it is about it that I find annoying. It's a useful term. I'm not offended by it, but something about every time I read that term, I don't know, is anyone else like that? I don't know. Anyway, my point is that when neurotypicals will take this stuff, they can study like maniacs for like 16 hours straight or be ultra productive and clean the whole house and paint the living room. But when I take it, I can like pay a bill and go to the store. I mean, I might even be able to do both in the same day. Neurotypicals and Adderall. I painted my whole room in 2 hours and did my essay in just 1 hour. Me on Adderall. I made breakfast instead of eating peanut butter from the jar. Me. Forgetting to do the dishes and getting crippling anxiety for it. Medicated me. Forgetting to do the dishes still, but moving on with my day. By the way, I got all these memes from r/ADHD memes. Do you know how dangerous it is for someone with ADHD to even open that site? Do you have any idea how long I spent scrolling through just to find these? Well, actually they were at the top of the page. They were not hard to find at all. But that's my point, okay? Now, getting a little addicted to social media or getting stuck scrolling for hours and hours is a bad example of an
ADHD thing.
Mostly because anybody with a smartphone in the last decade can then relate to it and go, oh yeah, sometimes I get stuck scrolling through Instagram way too long too. I guess we're all a little ADHD. I understand the temptation. I mean, you hear some of the symptoms and they just seem so ubiquitous and relatable that it's pretty fair and normal to draw a conclusion like, oh, I guess it must be some spectrum and we're all a little ADD sometimes, but it just feels a little invalidating as an experience. Then of course you get the judgmental society who doesn't know that much about ADHD, but instead of trying to relate to it, just makes you feel like shit for it. Me, I'm so much better on Adderall. I can clean my room now. My dad, don't you think it's bad that you need to take speed to clean your room? I mean, that one's pretty funny, but I mean, you hear it, still makes you feel like garbage, but that one's pretty funny. Trust me, nobody with ADHD is real happy and proud that we have to take medication. I mean, it's pretty normal for us to even forget to take our medication. That would require a good working memory and organizational skills, which is kind of the whole reason why we take it in the first place. Doctors. ADHD medication is addictive, and that's why it's so restricted and controlled. Most people with ADHD. I forgot to take my meds again. Lamau. That's our one thing we need to understand a lot better about these study drugs, is that it doesn't affect people without ADHD the same way it affects somebody with ADHD. I mean, neurochemically, it does obviously, it's the same drug, but the effect is very different. And that's because there is a system in your brain called the executive functioning system. It's kind of like your brain's secretary and controls things like
planning, focusing attention, remembering instructions, time management, juggling multiple tasks successfully.
Like a secretary. It decides what's important and when it's important. That is why you can focus on the task at hand without thinking about lunch or random song lyrics or how your pants suddenly feel against your skin. All that other stuff, memories, thoughts, sensory information, is still all coming in. It's still floating around your brain, but your brain is in a meeting with homework, and that secretary keeps all those distractions outside. They need to make an appointment. Good job, secretary. See where I'm going with this? The ADHD brain just doesn't, our secretary sucks, okay? Our working memory sucks. Our internal ability to sense time passing sucks. Our ability to voluntarily focus our attention sucks. Don't get me wrong, we have a brain just as capable of attention and focus as any other brain. We just have significant issues with directing that attention voluntarily. Here's another way to think about it. Every thought or memory or piece of stimulus information coming in is given a number of importance, 1 through 10. Ideally, the most important thoughts, the 8s, 9s, and 10s, get to be addressed first by the brain. And the less important thoughts, the 1s, 2s, and 3s, they can be either forgotten about or shelved for a later date. That mental organizing of thoughts and assigning priority happens all the time, subconsciously, naturally. But with ADHD, depending on the type and severity, all thoughts might be given completely random numbers, regardless of how important or urgent they actually are, or maybe everything is just given a 5. When every thought or idea that passes through your head is all given the same level of importance of a 5, the brain doesn't know what to handle first. And just as importantly, it can't let go of anything either because everything might be important. The result can feel like the mind is constantly under attack with 1,000 thoughts, and it's struggling to find the few important thoughts it actually needs to pay attention to. Okay, getting back to the study drugs. Can you guess where in the brain these drugs have their biggest effect? That's right, executive functioning. You buff up that part of the brain in an ADHDer and the secretary actually works. The brain can be in meetings without getting constantly interrupted. And even though the drug is a stimulant, the brain can relax. On the other hand, you buff up that part of the brain in a neurotypical brain. Sorry for using that. Okay, I'm not sorry for using the word. I just don't like it. And now they're moving extra fast. They're doing all their studying in 2 hours. They're writing their paper in 1 hour. They're painting the room. It's one thing after another. There's no distractions at all. It's party time. Me on Adderall. I made breakfast instead of eating peanut butter from the jar. At the end of the day, the reason we get these memes about how neurotypical function very highly and efficiently on stimulant medication, while ADHDers basically are just trying to function like normal human beings for once, is the same reason why so many people don't really believe that ADHD is a real thing, and instead reduces it to a laziness and lack of discipline disorder. And that problem is a general lack of understanding of how ADHD really works, and I can't really blame them for that. And yeah, that stuff is kind of ignorant and pretty annoying. But the real tragedy here that doesn't get talked about enough, even within the ADHD community itself, is our own internal learned sense of failure, shame, guilt, inadequacy, a feeling like you're not enough. We often grow up being told we have lots of potential. Parents and teachers may notice that we have a high ceiling for understanding or accomplishing things, but time and time again, we fail. And what we learn from all these repeated experiences is that we can never reach our potential. I noticed as an adult that I might find some new interest and feel invigorated, even feel alive with it and think, wow, this is amazing. I'm ready to incorporate this into my identity, as this is something that I really like. Hyper-focused on it is the ADHD term. But at the same time, just beneath the surface of all that excitement is the learned belief that this is not real. If I pick up something new or find some new interest that's exciting to me, I've learned to ignore that feeling. I know that that feeling is transient, it won't stick around, and in 3 months, I'll never see it again. You might have potential, James, but you never reach it. And I've noticed I make the mistake of telling somebody. I tell the people at work I found this new cool thing, and then I'd have to do the ADHD walk of shame, where 2 months later, somebody at work asks me, hey, how's that project you're working on? How's that coming? And I have to shamefully admit or shamefully lie that, yeah, it's collecting dust. I didn't follow through with it. I'm not interested anymore. A lot of people try out new things and they lose interest. There's nothing new about that. But what if you knew that that was a core feature of your personality? What if all your interests and your favorite movies or your favorite songs or hobbies, what if you knew that you wouldn't care about any of them in 4 months? I didn't choose to stop caring. I want to care about something for longer than that. I didn't want to lose interest in these things. I want to have something stable in my life that is consistent, that I can rely on, that feels like that's a part of me. It's just such a undermining experience. It feels like an internal sense of betrayal almost. It's hard to build a life around. And that inner sense of failure and inadequacy and wasted potential is made all the worse by the shame. The shame that we have to take drugs to cheat our way through life. We're such failures as people that we need to take basically meth just to function properly. It's like you go through your whole life wondering why you're such an unreliable, incompetent failure at just about everything you do. Maybe you find out about ADHD and talk to a psychiatrist or a doctor about it, and then you get shamed by them too. They tell you about how terrible stimulants are, how many people abuse them, and they're looking at you like you're just a wannabe drug dealer. When I said earlier that nobody with ADHD is real happy and proud that we have to take medication, this is what I'm talking about. I consider myself pretty well educated on ADHD and have been complimented by my doctors with the amount of insight and intuition I have for how it affects me. And even then, there's still a scared, emotional part of me that questions whether ADHD is real at all. Maybe it's real, but I must be lying. I must not have it. I must just be a failure and have convinced everybody that I have ADHD. But really, I'm just an unmotivated failure, and I need to take basically meth to go about my life. Every ADHDer at some point. What if I don't really have ADHD? What if I just have a complex series of personal flaws that map onto ADHD, experiences that are incredibly related to other people with ADHD, and every failing in my life is entirely and unequivocally my fault? I hope you fellow ADHDers are doing okay, and I hope that you, along with me, can continue to be kind to ourselves as we try to manage our situation. And if this related to you in any way and you don't have an official diagnosis, well, first, of course, I should say you should go talk to a doctor, and you should. But frankly, so many doctors don't really understand ADHD that well, and they're just... you should still try and seek out a specialist in ADHD. They can help you out. But in the meantime, I would suggest you go scroll through r/ADHD memes yourself. And if you find yourself crying and laughing down the rabbit hole for 5 hours, well, then I got some news for you. Much love, everyone, and I'll see you next time.